and welcome to this session for all those who are line managing emotional literacy support assistants or ELSAs. This training is perfect if you have a member of staff currently training to be an ELSA, but also for those who have been line managing for a while and would benefit from a little refresher on what the role entails and how it works most effectively. So we're going to start first of all by talking about what is ELSA. So the ELSA project was first developed in Hampshire by the educational psychologist there, and it's an initiative designed to help schools to meet the needs of emotionally vulnerable pupils from within their own resources, because we all know that the waiting list for CAMS is huge, and by that point sometimes children's problems have got worse and worse, and actually if we can intervene early through our own resources, we're going to be much better placed to support young people. ELSAs are emotional literacy support assistants, and they work within the schools. They help children to recognise, understand and manage their emotions to increase success. They also plan and deliver individual and small group support programmes. They receive training and supervision from educational psychologists. We know that children learn better and happier in school if their emotional needs are met. So when children are using all of their emotional and cognitive energy focusing on their personal and interpersonal difficulties, their capacity to concentrate on learning new information and skills is reduced. So ELSAs plan and deliver programmes of support to children identified within school as likely to benefit from additional help to increase their emotional literacy. Programmes normally last between half a term to one whole term, and occasionally a little bit longer. Children may, for example, receive support to recognise and manage their emotions, to raise their self-esteem, to improve peer relationships, to recover from significant loss or bereavement, and resolve conflict effectively. Most of the support is individual and builds on the relationship of trust that's developed between the pupil and the ELSA. Some skills will be enhanced through small group work too, particularly social and friendship skills, although some children will need some individual support first to be able to access a group like that. It's an initiative that was developed and supported by educational psychologists who apply psychological knowledge of children's social and emotional development to particular areas of need and to specific casework. The training was developed by psychologists, and ELSAs are provided with regular supervision by educational psychologists to develop their understanding, skills and practice. This is an overview of the training that we deliver within the Xavier Catholic Education Trust to our trainee ELSAs. So the training was initially developed by the Hampshire Educational Psychology Service and by Sheila Burton specifically, who came up with the ELSA project. And then it's just been tailored slightly to meet our needs. So day one, the ELSAs will cover understanding emotional literacy, exploring emotional awareness, and also the planning and guidelines for school ELSA implementation. So they receive lots of the same information that I'm going to deliver to you in this session today. And usually in other times, we would all get together for that training session where we talk about how to implement the ELSA intervention within school, but obviously that's not able to be the case currently. Day two, we look at self-esteem and resilience, security, affiliation and selfhood, mission and competence, which those 5 things are all part of self-esteem. So we look at self-esteem in a great amount of depth during that day. Day 3 is managing emotions, anger, anxiety and school avoidance, which I've added in to this year's training programme just because it's such a huge issue at the moment following the COVID pandemic. Day 4, we look at social skills and friendship groups. We look at using Lego and how you might do therapeutic approaches using Lego, and then social and therapeutic stories. Day 5, we look at bereavement, loss and family separation. We also do a session on supervision so that they know what to expect. And following that, we do a tools carousel, which looks at lots of different things that you can use with children, such as puppets and other really good resources. And then day 6, the final day, we look at active listening skills, which are so vital to all of this work that will be done by the ELSAs. We look at safeguarding in the ELSA context. We do a resource sharing lunch so that they can share the things that they've found amongst each other. And then we invite some ELSAs that experienced ELSAs in to talk about their experiences. And we'll have one from primary and one from secondary. And then we'll finish off with a bit of a reflection on how the course has been and what you're going to take forward into your role as an ELSA. So just to recap, The Xavier ELSAs will have attended 6 days of training on aspects of emotional literacy. They were expected to build relationships of trust with young people to help them to increase their emotional literacy, and they will increase that emotional literacy by planning and delivering programs for individuals and small groups, which will normally last between half a term and 1 term. So why is emotional literacy so important? Estelle Morris said in her speech at the Primary Curriculum Conference, developing children as rounded people and active members of the community is at the heart of what schools are all about. We all know that our educational responsibilities don't begin and end with curriculum targets, and we will always have responsibility to support the development of the whole child. Currently in the UK, the statistics tell us that 1 in 6 young people aged 5 to 16 suffer with a diagnosable mental health issue, and that's gone up significantly over the last few years. We also know that 50% of mental health issues are already established by the age of 14, so it's so important that we intervene early. Statistics also tell us that suicide is now the most common cause of death in the 15 to 34-year age group, and young men are particularly vulnerable. And when we explore the reasons for that, one thing that comes up again and again is that young people tend to find it more difficult to talk about how they feel. So that's why interventions such as ELSA are so important to help children throughout their schooling to be able to start to express how they feel, and to express how they feel early. Another reason that ELSA is so important is for academic achievement, because we know that children learn more effectively if they're happy in their work, they believe in themselves, they like their teachers, and they feel that school is supporting them. And achievement in school in academic subjects is vital to pupil happiness and self-esteem. We know that when any of these things change, there's an effect on a child's learning. And it's also true that teachers teach most effectively when they are happy in their work and believe in themselves, like their pupils, and feel school is supporting them. When children aren't feeling that they're getting anywhere in terms of their learning, their unhappiness and disappointment in themselves is seen in a variety of behaviours, from being very withdrawn to very challenging, including plenty of strategies for work avoidance. Achievement in school is also vital to teacher happiness and self-esteem, because staff need to feel that they're doing a good job too. So while schools can make a contribution to the development of pupil emotional health, the psychology is just as important for the teachers. And as well as being great for the pupils, there's clear benefits for the school as a whole. So firstly, access to prompt support for pupils in need. So when emotional vulnerability is recognised, there's a member of staff on hand who can offer support to pupils or advice to other pupils. You also might notice positive changes in pupils with behaviour, emotion and social difficulties. So we know that through ELSA interventions, behavioural difficulties have been shown to decrease in the pupils who receive the intervention over a period of time. And this increases the learning not only by the pupil receiving the input, but also there's a knock-on effect of the reduced disruption that, within the class, which improves the learning environment for fellow classmates too. There's also new skills and ideas that can be cascaded to staff. So experience shows that often ELSAs are consulted by other members of staff with pupil concerns. So you've got that expertise and those 6 full days of training from an educational psychologist that then that person has within school to be able to support other staff. And then finally, schools find themselves better able to manage pupil difficulties for themselves without having to wait for outside assistance. There are also very clear benefits for pupils, and these have been evaluated by lots of studies across the country and published in national publications. So the kind of benefits that we see in that research is that pupils feel very supported by having that special time and being listened to, because for some it might be the first time that they've really had an adult spending time actually listening to them and understanding where they're coming from, and giving them an opportunity to express how they're feeling. The children develop greater self-awareness. They learn to talk about their difficulties from an early age and see that as normal and see that as okay to do. They develop coping strategies. They're able to then interact more successfully with others and develop friendships, and also know how to communicate better with adults. They feel better about themselves, their self-esteem is increased, and they just manage better generally in school, as well as having their learning outcomes improve. So now that we've covered that basic introduction to ELSA, the reasons for the intervention, how it came about, the unique factors about it, and what the impacts are that you're likely to be able to see, we can now start talking about the good practice guidelines, how to get started, and how to make sure that you are the best line manager that you can possibly be. So the first thing to talk about is the allocation of time. So before accepting a delegate onto the ELSA training course, the head teachers were required to sign an agreement to fulfil certain requirements, and one of the main ones is to ring fence the equivalent of a day a week for each ELSA to carry out the responsibilities of the role. The only exception for this is for very small schools of around 100 pupils or less, in which case the equivalent of half a day per week is accepted. And the reason for that is to make sure that they can really hone their skills. So it's much better for schools to have just maybe 1 or 2 ELSAs, depending on their size for a primary school, and maybe 3 ELSAs for a secondary school, to make sure that that ELSA can really spend a good amount of time honing their skills and developing their practice. The ring fence time is to include planning time, not just the direct delivery, and that's essential because ELSAs are expected to develop bespoke programs of support matched to a pupil's needs. They're required to plan the sessions in advance, and that's just to make sure that it's not about ad hoc, informal support sessions in response to incidents. It's got to be something that's proactive. Just as a teacher would plan their lessons beforehand, an ELSA needs to have time to plan their sessions beforehand, because otherwise they end up being very reactive, and there's less chance of being able to keep to a structure and meet those targets by the end of that 6-week intervention. Once an ELSA embarks on a programme of work with a pupil, it's important for the sessions to be regular. Without that continuity of support, the intervention will be less effective. And much of the success of the ELSA project hinges on the quality of the relationships and the trust that a pupil develops with the ELSA. Failing to be available at an expected time undermines the pupil's confidence, and it suggests that their needs are not sufficiently important. Sometimes it's unavoidable that a planned session has to be cancelled, and in this case it's so important that the pupil is ideally warned in advance, even if it's earlier that day, but preferably with an explanation. So in a similar way, consistency of workspace shows a pupil that the work that they do with the ELSA is valued and important. If they end up being scurried away into a corner of a library while there are other children around, it doesn't create that sense of security that they're going to need, and also it doesn't make them feel that those ELSA sessions are particularly important. And we also know that familiarity with surroundings increases security. So if your ELSA is having to move between different rooms every single time with that child's not going to feel as safe, and it's really going to impact on the effectiveness of what they're going to be able to do with that child. The worst possible scenario for an ELSA is to have to search with the pupil for available space, because it implies that it's low priority as well as wasting valuable time. We know that space is at a premium in some schools, and there may not be a room that can be regularly made available, but there may, however, be a shared area that could be partially screened to afford a measure of privacy. Wherever the work takes place, it should be free from interruptions from other staff or children. A staff member entering a room to search for equipment in a cupboard interrupts the flow of the session and impacts the ethos of the work. ELSAs need easily accessible storage space for planning records and resources, and they often have interesting posters and work to display, which helps to reinforce the work that they do. So on to resources. An essential feature of the ELSA programme is that the work is different from that which is routinely done in class. Some relevant and engaging worksheets may be used, but a variety of activities and games captures the interest of pupils and motivates engagement. ELSAs have shown a large range of useful resources during training to help them to identify resources that would work and be of particular value to them. In order to keep the work interesting, they need to build up a bank of resources over time. And this should include some published resources such as games and books, as well as homegrown resources. No subject teacher in school will be expected to provide a curriculum without the support of relevant resources, and neither should an ELSA. There should therefore be an annual budget to add to the emotional literacy resources in the same way that any other subject area would have. When finances are tight, some money could perhaps be made available through school fundraising events. ELSAs have often shown great creativity in developing or in adapting engaging resources to support their work, but this takes time. There are also some very good resources that can be downloaded from websites such as the ELSA support website and laminated. It's unreasonable, however, to expect them to prepare resources all in their own time. Referral of pupils. So ELSAs need support to identify the pupils to work with. We advise that they should not be given the most demanding pupils in their early days as an ELSA, since they need to focus on building up their confidence and skills during that first year. Once staff recognise the value of this work, they can sometimes create an unmanageable workload for the ELSAs by urging them to support ever more pupils. And if ELSAs are not supported in prioritising this work, they end up trying to support too many pupils and consequently be unable to provide an adequate quality or amount of support. Generally, they might be expected to have at least a weekly half-hour session with each pupil referred for support, continuing until the initial programme aims are achieved. If clear aims are not identified, ELSAs will not know when a programme of work should draw to a close, and the expectation is that the programme would normally be completed within a school term. This may be followed up with briefer contact by the pupil to check on progress and maintain changes while new skills are consolidated. It's unrealistic to expect an ELSA to cure all pupils' difficulties. If they're expected to work too long with one child, the work loses focus and ELSAs can start to lose heart because they feel that they're not making much difference anymore. They also run out of ideas and they could create an overdependency which may be fostered if support is unduly prolonged. Support can be passed over to classroom staff once the initial programme aims are achieved. A further programme focused on developing different skills could be initiated after a break if felt appropriate. If an ELSA is tied to working long term with one or more pupils, needs of other pupils will remain unaddressed. It's important to differentiate between a programme of support with planned sessions that have clear objectives and the follow-up maintenance support that may be appropriate for a period following the programme of support. This support is different in nature and doesn't require the same degree of planning, and it shouldn't continue indefinitely. And there are a few things that I just want to add to that. So it's very important. Often EPs will write on education, health and care plans that a pupil needs to have an ELSA intervention. And that's great because lots of them do need that ELSA intervention, but it's so important that that is not then construed as needing ELSA continuously every week all through the year. They don't need that. They need an ELSA intervention which is planned and monitored within a fixed time frame, and then that they move on from that. So they cannot consistently just have sessions and sessions and sessions because it's not what the ELSA support is designed to do. The other thing that's really important is that the ELSA receives referral forms, and there's a good way of referring within the school. So usually they've been given during their training sessions a referral form that they can use, and it's very helpful if those referrals, the teacher might fill in a referral form and then hand that to the line manager, and then you would help them to prioritise which referral should come first and help them with that target setting so that they know exactly what they're working on and who to work with first. Because what I hear from ELSAs quite frequently is that teachers stop them in the corridor and ask them to see a pupil, or they might get asked by a parent to see a pupil, and they end up just completely overwhelmed. So it's really important to support them with that referral process. So, session planning. ELSAs have all been provided with a suggested planning sheet. They are also free to develop their own, but these elements should all be present. So for a session to be focused, it should have a clear objective. This should be something that the ELSA wants to achieve. For example, it might be explaining the firework model as a way of understanding anger, or something that she wants the pupil to achieve. For example, being able to name 2 qualities that support friendship. The plan should list any resources needed for the session and the activities that they hope to do. And ELSAs are encouraged to support learning with interesting resources and different short activities that will help to maintain pupil engagement. Planning these in advance helps to maintain pace within the session and avoids pupils becoming bored or distracted. On occasions, a pupil may arrive at a session with an issue that they want to offload, and it would be inappropriate to insist on sticking rigidly to a session plan in this instance. The departure from plan can be noted, and if still appropriate, the session could be delivered the next time. At the end of the sessions, the ELSA should make a few evaluative comments, noting points of interest which will inform the planning for the next session. We talk a lot about target setting during the ELSA sessions, but targets can be quite hard to set for pupils in terms of social, emotional and mental health targets. So they may need some support with making these really smart. They also need to be agreed with all involved. So the pupil needs to know what these sessions are all about and what they're expected to be working towards, and preferably have a say in those targets as well. It's also helpful for the teacher, the class teacher, to know, so that those targets can be reinforced outside of the ELSA sessions. Right, on to parental support. So we know that pupils make their best progress when there is parental support for their learning and when there's good communication between home and school as needed. And this is also true for the ELSA support. To avoid parents being alarmed by their child receiving ELSA support, it's helpful if the school make all parents aware that this is routinely available in school to support a wide range of needs for limited periods. A large number of pupils are likely to access this at some time, and normalising that ELSA provision reduces the risk of parents becoming unduly anxious upon hearing that their child is considered likely to benefit from an ELSA involvement. It's good practice to inform parents of additional support for their child. There has been some debate about whether consent should be sought for ELSA. In most cases, this is readily forthcoming. However, there have been concerns about the rare occasions that this is refused, and this has sometimes occurred in relation to pupils for whom there are significant worries about what might be happening in their lives outside of school, with a possibility even of safeguarding issues. It's therefore not a requirement for school to request permission for a pupil to receive support from a regular member of school staff. Consent is not required for additional learning support, like a literacy intervention, and need not be requested for emotional and social support either. However, consent is always required for an involvement from an outside agency, like an educational psychologist. It's good practice to invite parents to discuss the support their children receive and review the progress. They may be invited to meet with the ELSA to discuss the work that she or he is doing, or to review progress at the end of the programme. Some schools may prefer the SENCO to also take part in such meetings. Good liaison may help parents to a new appreciation of their child's needs and also lead to some positive changes at home. Whole school support. So we really encourage ELSAs to try to share with other members of staff exactly what they do and what the ELSA intervention is, because a lot of the time people don't fully realise what is on offer, and therefore that may lead them to maybe use the ELSA in a way that they're not supposed to be used, like for ad hoc behaviour instances, for example. So the new skills being developed in ELSA sessions need the support of other staff in order to be generalised to the whole wider school context. And good communication between ELSAs and other staff will greatly enhance the effectiveness of ELSA support. There should be a designated line manager in school to support the ELSA work. And by the fact that you're listening to this, I'm guessing that's you. So the line managers should help to ensure that class teachers and teaching assistants understand the purpose and nature of ELSA support, so that they can work in conjunction with the ELSA to provide coherent support to children receiving the intervention. The line manager should ensure that the ELSA has a manageable workload, and this may require prioritisation of pupils for support and management of the waiting list. ELSA work can be very demanding and is at times emotionally draining because of the complexity of the pupils' needs. The line manager should ensure that the ELSA is able to discuss confidentially issues of concern arising out of that work and receives the emotional support within school that may be needed on occasions. The line manager needs to ensure that the ELSA is given time to plan and deliver support programmes in accordance with the agreement that we've talked about that the head teacher signed before the ELSA was accepted onto the training course. The line manager should be an advocate for the ELSA work, helping to secure appropriate working space and conditions. When a pupil is referred for an ELSA intervention, the ELSA should be supported in setting realistic and achievable programme aims, similar to the SMART targets that should characterise IEPs. And finally, in addition to this, it's good practice to routinely evaluate outcomes in schools. Sometimes this is done by the use of pre- and post-intervention measures such as rating scales, but it can also be done by monitoring the achievement of programme aims. In-school evaluation will encourage staff and governors to have confidence in the use of school resources to sustain ELSA work. One of the things that sets the ELSA intervention apart from any other social and emotional intervention is the fact that they have to receive supervision from an educational psychologist once per half term. And from its very inception, this was an essential requirement for supervision has been enshrined within the ELSA project. Research suggests that supervision serves several purposes, both in terms of supporting the supervisee and ensuring the quality of their work. So there are things like it develops the supervisee's skills and competence, it safeguards the individuals that they work with by improving the quality of their work, and it also allows them to sustain and support the supervisee. A recent review of the literature concluded that effective supervision has a wide-ranging impact on the supervisee, resulting in increased feelings of support, self-efficacy and self-awareness, as well as enhanced skills and knowledge. Conversely, a lack of supervision may lead to feelings of staleness, rigidity and defensiveness. Failure to regularly attend the supervision provided by myself will result in the deregistration of the person as an ELSA. This action would be only taken as a last resort following liaison with the school. The person concerned would no longer be able to do their ELSA work or be referred to as an ELSA and would not be able to access any of the supplementary courses provided for ELSAs. Now that we've talked about the responsibilities of a line manager, it's also important to tell you what my responsibility is as the EP supervisor. So it's my responsibility to arrange and facilitate sessions. Most of the time these will be in school and in different schools, because the ELSAs come from lots of different schools, so we tend to travel around different sites so that they get to see other people's ELSA rooms, which can be really helpful. Obviously more recently it's had to be done remotely, but that's also been fine too, and actually that's quite useful in some circumstances to allow the ELSAs to be able to attend sessions without it taking a huge amount of their day. The supervision sessions are 2 hours every half term. It's also my responsibility to record attendance and also to follow up on any non-attendance, because it is so important that they attend supervision. Initially, any non-attendance will be taken up with the supervisee, but obviously because it could result in them being deregistered as an ELSA, it would always be taken up with you, and I will liaise with you if there are any issues. It's also my responsibility to negotiate a group working agreement with them all, to provide professional support to the ELSAs. So often during our 2-hour sessions, the first part of the session, there's always an agenda. The first part of the session may be taken up with giving them some information about something that they may need to know about or may be useful for their work at that time. So at various points we've talked about resilience, or we've had a focus on emotion coaching, or we've had a focus on school avoidance, emotionally based school avoidance. It's also my job to provide psychological perspective on pupils, and what we do is we do group problem solving. So all of the ELSAs get to bring issues with them if they want to discuss them, and we use a solution circles type approach for them to be able to talk about their issue, for us all to be able to ask questions about it and then reflect on it and use the perspectives of my psychological perspective, as well as the other ELSAs within the group who have an enormous amount of experience with them as well. And finally, it's also my job as a supervisor to uphold the principles and guidelines of the ELSA project and to give updates about things that have been given to us by the ELSA project. So that brings us to the end of this session. I think we've talked about most things, but as always, if there is anything that we've not spoken about that you feel you need to know about, please do email me at any time on a.demario@xaviercet.org.uk. But now it's important to take some time to talk with your ELSA trainees or your ELSAs about the things that we've talked about today, just to consider how you can work together to ensure that the ELSA role can be implemented as effectively as possible within your school. Thanks very much for taking the time to listen.